The Baghdad Bugle, the Adani Carmichael coal mine. For the non-Australian Bugle readers, this is a local story about an Australian coal mine. Bear with me, there are a number of reasons for this. One is the scale. It is a $16 or $22 billion project, depending on who you ask. The second reason is the international reach, although this is only briefly touched upon in this video. And thirdly, energy projects often tie into conflict stories that the Bugle typically focus on. In fact, the more research that went into the subject, the more Australia began to resemble a country from the Middle East or the Third World when it came to negotiating with a foreign multinational company. An overview of Australian coal. In 2010, reserves of high-quality thermal and coking coal were estimated at 34 billion tonnes in the state of Queensland alone. Since the exploration of the Galilee Basin that Adani is seeking to exploit, that figure is now much higher. At current production rates, Australia has known black coal reserves for almost 100 years. Brown coal reserves could sustain current production for over 500 years. On a national scale, black coal exports have been steadily rising since 2010, with Australia on track to export $56.5 billion worth of coal for the 2016-17 financial year, approximately 30% of the constantly expanding world coal trade. Interesting to note given all the predictions of the demise of coal. In Australia, media coverage of this proposed coal mine in the north-eastern state of Queensland always begins with politics. We have an Environment and Resources Minister on the centre-right who talks about transitioning to clean energy and timidly tries to suggest that facts and the basic laws of physics might interfere with idealism or ideology. He always gets clobbered by the centre-left and far-left who are not timid at all and basically dominate the airwaves through the national broadcaster. As a result, it is almost impossible to learn some basic facts about a mine that had previously been slated to dig up 60 million tonnes of coal per year to fire Indian power stations. That figure has now been revised down to 40 million tonnes per year. The original intention to bring electricity to and thereby raise the standard of living of millions of people in India has long since been lost in the controversy. This approach will be a little different by starting with some facts. Therefore, without further ado, fact number 1, jobs. Adani, enthusiastically supported by politicians on both sides, originally promoted the idea that 10,000 direct and indirect jobs would be created as a result of the Carmichael coal mine. The number was arrived at in 2013 by the consulting firm GHD that had been engaged by Adani. This is false. The Indian company's own minions have directly contradicted the 10,000 number and have stated so quite clearly under oath in the Queensland Land Court. According to Adani's own mining operations CEO for Australia, efficiencies will be gained from large-scale automation of its operations, including the use of driverless trucks in the coal pits. In short, no such magical 10,000 number exists. The politicians have a bone in their teeth, and it appears that Adani is happy to let them run with it, certainly in front of the cameras anyway. Fact number 2. Windmills magically appear out of thin air without the need for thousands of tons of coking coal to smelt the iron ore to produce the steel to construct the giant turbines. Shockingly, this is false. I almost spilled my latte when an engineer told me this. He also said that the iron ore and cement needed to produce the wind turbines had to be dug out of the ground from one of those abominations called a mine. Refusing to shut up, he prattled off some other numbers. To produce 1,000 kilograms of pig iron requires 1,800 kilograms of iron ore, 900 kilograms of coking coal, 450 kilograms of limestone, during which 1,350 kilograms of CO2 is emitted just at the furnace stage. This does not include the process of converting the pig iron to the high-grade steel required for the wind turbine and the rebar in the foundations. The average turbine weighs approximately 75,000 kilograms. standing on 480 cubic metres of concrete, roughly 1,100 tonnes, requiring another 110 tonnes of CO2 emissions, all poured over 45,000 kilograms of rebar. This depends, of course, on the firm ground. Softer soils and higher winds require higher tonnages of concrete. In the Monolith Mountains in Scotland, for example, an estimated 1,500 tonnes of concrete alone will be required for each turbine. A road network will also need to be built throughout the rugged highlands as infrastructure for the wind turbine maintenance crews. On the bright side, however, the extremely toxic component of a wind turbine, the neodymium, in the magnet of the generator is produced in Baotou in northern China, and only foreigners have to live with the consequences. Neodymium also comes from a mine and needs to be repeatedly boiled in sulfates, ammonia, and hydrochloric acid. These and other toxic compounds, such as thorium, that is potentially radioactive, are the byproducts of this process and our smug attitude towards green energy. Like the pronouncements from Adani, the most interesting statistics about the toxic waste pumped into a giant man-made tailings lake come from the Chinese state-owned enterprise that produces the neodymium. Its Safety and Environmental Protection Department states that 7 million tonnes of wastewater are pumped into the lake every year. That said, the neighbouring farmers with the white hair, black gums and skyrocketing cancer rates are well out of sight and well out of mind, so we can just ignore that one. This is not an anti-renewables argument, it is an anti-bad renewables argument. The above points are merely the result of some brutal paraphrasing of Adani's own people, investigative journalists and, strangely enough, environmental activists who have decided to try their hand at honesty. If the comrades at The Guardian and Greenpeace China are prepared to dig into the dark side of renewable energy industry, that leaves precious little excuse for our own snowflakes back home. Fact number 3, tax. There is a common belief that Adani has registered a private company in the Cayman Islands in order to avoid paying Australian taxes if the coal mine goes ahead. This is partly correct. The proposed mine itself is controlled by a public company, Adani Enterprises Limited, which is listed on the Bombay Stock Exchange. There is associated infrastructure, however, that has also been proposed as part of the overall operation. This includes a railway link from the mine site to the AAPT, the Adani Abbott Point Terminal at Bowen, on the Queensland coast. It is this associated infrastructure that is separately controlled by a private Cayman Islands entity, Atula Resources Limited. The separate company structures, aside from being a blatant tax dodge, have led to suspicion that Adani might not actually be interested in the coal mining operation itself. Do they simply want to on-sell the license for the Carmichael mine to another company? The value of such an asset would partly justify the debt on the company's balance sheet. If this is the case, the new operator would be dependent on the Adani Cayman Islands owned and operated infrastructure to transport the coal to the coast and load it onto the ships at Abbott Point. In addition to the potential monopoly on the coal transport, the same Cayman Islands entity is in possession of a royalty deed to the value of $2 per tonne for every tonne of coal mined after the first 400,000 tonnes. Even at the reduced projections of 40 million tonnes annually, that's not a bad little tax-free earner. The beauty of the whole scheme is that Adani is lining up for a soft loan of well over $1 billion from the Australian government to pay for this rail infrastructure, underwritten by guess who? Yes, the Aussie taxpayer. Whether or not Adani maintains control of the mine site through the publicly listed company or not is besides the point. We've all heard of smart, stupid people. Well, it must be said that in Australia we have some of the smartest, stupidest politicians in the world. Effectively handing over $1 billion of taxpayer money to a Cayman Islands-controlled company is one of the reasons why Australians are abandoning the major political parties. Most people have a red line in what they are prepared to accept from their politicians, and this scrubby little deal pretty much crosses that line for almost everybody. except for those in Brisbane and Canberra apparently. Finance. Australia has 4 big or first-tier banks. All of them have refused to finance the Adani Carmichael mine. Internationally, 19 other financial institutions have also refused to participate, including the State Bank of India. It's probably a safe bet that climate change is not their primary concern. Public image and the risk presented by Adani's travails overseas in India, Africa, and South America no doubt play into the calculations. This is the principal reason why the Australian government is considering the $1 billion soft loan from Australian taxpayers. That same government, however, refuses to state which company in the complex Adani corporate web would actually receive the funding. It's all commercial in confidence, despite the fact that it's the taxes of the plebs that are paying for it. Adani has been granted 60-year licenses by the Queensland Government to access unlimited amount of groundwater from underground aquifers plus additional river water. Due to legislative changes in 2016, the community has no right to appeal the granting of the water licenses. In addition, no government or independent monitoring of the groundwater will be required. Other mines are subject to scrutiny, but not the Adani Carmichael mine. It is hard to gauge local reaction without having been on site. Accounts do vary widely between outraged graziers and those that are quite happy for the project to go ahead. The destruction of farmland argument has been rated as nonsense by an expert who has worked and extensively surveyed the area. However, the volumes reported of required groundwater and a further 10.8 billion litres of river water would logically affect a much wider geographical area and therefore impact productive farmland. In conclusion, will the Adani mine go ahead? Difficult to say, but at this point I'm just not seeing the love. It's one thing for a company to be opposed by professional parasites at every level of society. It's another thing entirely when pragmatic people stop buying into your cosy, opaque little taxpayer-funded schemes. The need to transfer the risk to the taxpayers appears to destroy the business case for the operation to go ahead. Basically, the banks aren't backing it, so we'll nationalise the cost but keep the ownership in private hands in an offshore tax haven. And this is where I think it will ultimately come undone. There are plenty of people who are not ideologically opposed to coal. They understand that high sulphur coal from India or Indonesia will cause far more environmental damage than Australian coal in the new coal-fired plants that are being built all over the world. But those same people will not be taken for fools either. Transferring pricing, profit shifting and tax avoidance by multinationals is already a hot topic in Australia, nor has the groundwater issue been resolved. Maybe our mining engineer and geologist has explained it best. The coal industry itself has done a terrible job over many years of explaining to the public exactly what it does. Every steel product we have, from knives and forks to cars and wind turbines, are all produced by coal. Not only do the inner city trendies not know this, but more importantly, they simply don't want to know.